Welcome to this presentation on authentic leadership, equity, diversity and inclusivity in further education and skills. My name is Lindsey Johnson and I'm the Principal and CEO of Craven College in North Yorkshire, the gateway to the Yorkshire Dales. Leaders who relate to their teams and inspire effective action are critically important to organisational success. According to a study in the Leadership and Organisational Development Journal, employees' perception of authentic leadership serves as the strongest predictor of job satisfaction and can have a positive impact on work-related attitudes and happiness. The majority of employees believe authenticity in the workplace leads to several benefits, including better relationships with colleagues, higher levels of trust, greater productivity, and a more positive working environment. However, most of us engage in self-presentation in the workplace, at least occasionally. We actively manage the way we wish to be perceived in how we dress, what we say, and how we behave with others. Personally, I remember the 6th of June 1994 as being quite a momentous date, because it was the day that I got my first job as a lecturer in a college. And it was also the last time that I wore a skirt. I was persuaded by women that I respect that if I wanted to get this job, I should conform to other people's expectations. So off I trotted to the interview in my brand new country casual suit and a pair of court shoes. I felt very out of kilter. I overcompensated, I wasn't my normal self, but miraculously, I got the job. Significant numbers of lesbian, gay and bisexual workers seek to avoid discrimination by concealing their sexual orientation. But such concealment comes at great personal cost. Bisexual workers can face particular issues of isolation, invisibility and prejudice. However, the Equality Act 2010 bans workplace discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and requires public bodies to take positive action on sexual orientation equality. But laws on their own don't stop discrimination. It's up to us to negotiate policies and practices that make a real difference to the working lives of our LGBT+ colleagues and to challenge prejudice and discrimination. I knew that I could not hide my true butch under a tweed skirt. The only thing that you'll ever find in my closet are clothes. I don't hide. I decided that the college could either take me or leave me. I wanted to be measured about how good a teacher I was, not at how effectively I'd hidden my true self. I might have changed what I wore on the outside, but I never disclosed facts about my personal life. I'd compensate by sharing safe information, such as thoughts on sport and music, for instance. But I never revealed the fact that I had a girlfriend. What steps can leaders take to create a space in which employees feel safe to be authentic? One approach is to encourage authenticity among leaders. Authentic leaders are genuine and honest. They admit errors and they stay true to what they believe. When leaders are true to themselves and admit their mistakes or failures, it gives others permission to do the same, changing the norms of the workplace. Believe it or not, I would have never classed myself as a visible LGBT+ leader until I started at the Manchester College. You might think differently. I mean, how can you not know? Am I not the stereotypical butch lesbian that can only ever be found in the men's clothing section or at a barber's? But that's your assumption and not how I identify. I've never really had to come out. Growing up in a rural setting, I just fit in. Physically capable, able to shift a lot of bales at harvest time. No one overtly stuck a label on me. I spent 19 years in land-based colleges and no one ever asked me. But in Manchester, it wasn't just about the label. It was about holding a rainbow banner aloft, standing out, being proud. At Manchester, I came out. I came out as non-binary. My pronouns are they and them. I recognised that I needed to be a visible leader, to demonstrate what it means to be overtly inclusive, to challenge assumptions, to promote respect and understanding, and to celebrate diversity. And it is equally important that leaders welcome authenticity from their employees. Look at this data from Stonewall. Creating an open-minded, accepting environment in which differences in perspective and opinions are encouraged will set the foundation for an authentic workplace. Employees should be encouraged to express themselves and not simply follow the crowd, because differences in viewpoints often lead to innovative and novel solutions. But to be an authentic leader, you need to sustain high levels of motivation whilst retaining a sense of balance. Everyone can demonstrate their leadership. Whether you lead a class of students in your role as a teacher, whether you step up in a meeting and voice an opinion, or you have the desire to take on social causes, it is this intrinsic motivation that is derived from a sense of meaning in your life. Intrinsic motivation is often linked to your life story and the way you frame it. Examples include helping other people to develop, promoting social issues, and generally making a difference in the world. The key is to find a balance between your desires for external validation and the intrinsic motivation that provides fulfillment in your work. Of course, encouraging authenticity does not imply rigid adherence to a single true self. People are multidimensional. There can be variations in the way people express themselves at home and at work, yet both expressions may be consistent with their true selves. We should be asking ourselves not whether we express our true selves in the exact same ways at home and work, but rather whether our self-expressions at both home and work reflect who we really are. But as you reflect on what motivates you, think about who also influences you. There is a recognised paradox between authenticity and leadership. If you have a simplistic understanding of it, then it will hinder your individual growth and limit your impact. This might come as a surprise, but if you don't exercise some control over the expression of your authentic self, then you will get in trouble. If you're a straight talking and direct person who says exactly what they think without exerting any emotional control, you'll find yourself in hot water, or you'll just be downright offensive. Equally, if you attest to the adage, fake it till you make it, you will be found out. Admit that authenticity is not an innate quality. It is something that others attribute to you. Make sure that your deeds are consistent with your words. Recently, the parents of one of our students took to social media to express their displeasure, and in doing so, used homophobic comments directed personally at me. What I hadn't expected was a telephone call from the police, telling me that I was the victim of a hate crime. Somebody unknown to me had reported the abuse, as they were harassed by this indirect discrimination. And that made me reflect on what my role is in responding to this public humiliation. My usual response is to shrug with a "not this again" attitude. But this time, and especially with colleagues, friends, and even my washing machine repairman checking in to offer their support because they had seen the abuse online, I realised that a significant part of my role is to ensure that I am never, ever complicit. I believe that each and every one of us must challenge all forms of harassment and discrimination. But what is really hard is to identify and eradicate the microaggressions. By that, I mean the really subtle antagonisms that many people do not even recognise. And these become more complex at the juncture of intersectionality, where protected characteristics may overlap and become amplified. Everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. My job is to facilitate opportunities that enable people to improve their understanding of what it means to marginalise people in order to eradicate it. And those parents, well, they've accepted an opportunity to attend a hate crime awareness course rather than be charged with malicious communication and risk a custodial sentence. I'm asking you to speak up. Speak up for those who are marginalised in society. Add your voice to theirs. If we all speak up for diversity, for fairness, for acceptance, for inclusion, we will achieve true belonging. At its very core, intersectionality is about learning and understanding the views of others. Listen to, include, and meaningfully collaborate with diverse groups of people. Hear and honour their words. But remember, it's not the responsibility of marginalised groups to do all of the work in educating people on their experiences. This often takes up lots of emotional labour and should never be taken for granted. So be prepared to help undertake some of the work by doing your own research. Ask yourself if you're the right person to take up space on certain issues. Centre stories and actions on those with the lived experiences. Don't speak for them. Don't speak over them. If you haven't got diversity in those around you, invite people with those perspectives to contribute. Welcome them, mentor them, nurture them. Not only must we speak up for inclusion, we have to speak about inclusion. What are your social identities? Are you cisgender, privately educated, a parent, middle class? Reflect on these and consider how this impacts the discriminations that you do and don't experience. One good exercise is to write down 5 words that you would use to describe yourself. Are any of them a protected characteristic? Look at the 5 people that you are closest to and to whom you would turn to get advice. What are your similarities? Does your counsel offer a kaleidoscope on your own opinion, or is it completely different? If you want to be inclusive, you have to understand what inclusion means and what it looks like. So many of the words we use every day are ableist, exclusionary, and downright offensive to marginalised communities. When was the last time you said, "Oh, that's so lame," when you were annoyed about something? Consider how someone with a physical impairment might hear this. Recognise and correct your use of such terms. Accept criticism and call others out. As we become more intersectional and better at understanding differences, our language evolves from simply reflecting experiences from people of a singular identity. Most people don't want to cause offence. Try introducing yourself with your pronouns. For example, I am Lindsey. The pronouns I use are they and them. People often say, I'm sorry, but I just don't get it. That excuse isn't good enough. You need to work on it. It is simple. If that person was an inanimate object, like an umbrella, how would you use pronouns then? It's relatively straightforward. Do you have to use a pronoun as a label? Why don't you just try using their name? When it comes to gendered terms, try using words such as server instead of waiter or waitress. Avoid the needless use of gender. And one of my personal bugbears are when people refer to groups of students and go, hey guys! Why not try using a non-gendered term like folks? Do you know which words to use? Do you have any transitioning students in your classes? Do you know what dead naming is? Dead naming is the use of the birth or other former name of a transgender or non-binary person without their consent. It can be deeply offensive. You should also think about the use of title. For individuals who use a male title, it gives no indication of that person's marriage status. Many women will use the abbreviation Ms, quite often without actually realising what it is an abbreviation of. Simply to avoid the use of Miss or Mrs and revealing their marriage status. Individuals who identify as non-binary or prefer to use a non-binary title will use the term mixter. Try and be aware of the lack of non-binary options on paperwork across your organisation. For example, on HR systems and student enrolment forms. It can be a cause of consternation. There might be a reason, such as the Department of Work and Pensions or the Department of Education require it. But do you have to ask everybody to identify in a binary way? Internally, can you respect the individual in a way that they might feel comfortable with? If you have to use a binary choice of sex, then quite often the use of AFAB or AMAB, meaning assigned female or male at birth, may be preferable to simply the terms male or female. The next point is to encourage you to ask. Don't presume to know what it's like to be in another person's shoes. Take, for instance, a person with an obvious physical disability. Perhaps that person is in a wheelchair, has a prosthesis, or uses a walking stick. You're both approaching the same building. You sprint forward to open the door for this person, very chivalrous. You might think that you're being thoughtful and gracious, but actually, it is disempowering. It would be much more appropriate to ask that person, may I get the door for you? And don't be offended if they say no. And certainly don't congratulate them on being able to perform the task independently. Human libraries are a great way of learning and understanding what another person may consider respectful. With mentorship, individuals with protected characteristics may be willing to share their story with others. Again, the Equality Act is the primary piece of legislation relating to equality, diversity, and inclusion. It brings together several existing equality laws into one place so that it is easier to use. It sets out the personal characteristics that are protected by the law and the behaviour that is unlawful. It is against the law to discriminate against someone because of their protected characteristics. But consideration is also given to communities or seldom heard of groups, for example, asylum seekers or communities within areas of deprivation. We enable change by changing mindset. It's cultural, and 75% of the time, change efforts will fail, mainly because people aren't fully aligned or prepared for transformation. We need to challenge the way it's always been done. We can check our privilege and become aware of our own bias that can have a big influence and limit our belief and affect our behaviours. We must also be aware that if we surround ourselves with people who are similar to ourselves, we will end up with conformity bias, otherwise known as groupthink. The more diversity we have, the more successful and inclusive we will be. Use the search term type of bias on the internet. Be aware of what may limit you and your colleagues. Once you are aware of the many different kinds of types of bias, you can take steps to mitigate their effects. Challenge your own beliefs. They may limit you unless you use them as a catalyst to develop and learn. Ask difficult questions and really listen to the answers. Refuse to defend the status quo or your deeply held convictions and even prejudices in order to consider alternatives and new realities. Let's face these issues for real rather than hide behind policy procedure and box ticking. Be the one to influence and persuade others to come on the journey, to truly be an enabler of a more inclusive culture. If you haven't got information about the diversity in your organisation, then you need to collect it in order that you can interpret it. One of the issues that we face, like many organisations, is that a high proportion of people do not declare a disability or disclose their sexuality. We need to make everyone aware that this data is collected confidentially and cannot be used to identify them. What it does is allow an institution to make sure that our policies and processes are not discriminatory. If people do not declare, then our data is skewed and not representative. We know that people feel nervous about this type of disclosure, but we need them to be assured of the confidential nature of this data. Once you have the data, you need to work out what actions you will take because of what that data is telling you. Understand cause and effect and don't make assumptions. In fact, go back one step and ask. For instance, Ofsted talk about closing the achievement gap. Now that places the responsibility for achieving back on the individual. How can we be sure that we do not have an awarding gap? Finally, celebrate. Recognise and celebrate diversity. We need to avoid tokenism, only to prevent criticism and give the appearance that people are being treated fairly. Whether or not you believe that you are engaging in tokenism, actively recruiting underrepresented groups can lead employees and students associating their presence with tokenism. And feeling like a token can be draining, especially if you are the only one. For example, the only female, African British, or millennial in a department or class. Don't pigeonhole employees from underrepresented groups into roles or conversations related to diversity and inclusion. Recognise and applaud everyone's strengths, and if possible, connect individuals from underrepresented groups through mentoring, for example. The more positive imaging that you can utilise to promote a sense of belonging across the diversity of your organisation, the more welcome people will feel. I strongly encourage you all to participate in events that promote diversity and encourage allyship. Good luck in your journey towards true inclusivity and authenticity.